Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Tell me if you've had this experience. You've been watching a romantic comedy, and about halfway through, you stop and you think to yourself, wait a second. This entire plot, this entire story, this entire dynamic between these two people is based on the fact that they haven't had a basic conversation with each other that would clear up all of this misunderstanding in this dynamic. I've had this happen so many times watching romantic comedies where I think there is such a stupid conversation that needs to happen. If they could just talk about a basic thing, it's not even a deep issue they have. It's like a basic misunderstanding. This entire plot would be moved forward to the next level. And we have a friend of ours that calls this a dummy plot device.
He's a writer friend, and he says that it's the dummy plot. The dummy plot is when any plot could be solved, like the problems of the plot or the challenges of the plot, could be solved with a single conversation.
Yeah. And so this is very frustrating to me. And I think this isn't real life. People in real life, and then I stop, that ellipsis. I think, oh, actually, this is probably the dummy plot of a lot of our lives. Many people in romantic relationships, no wonder it's in romantic comedy so much. There are basic things that if we just had a conversation about, a basic conversation, we could clear up so many issues. Today on the show, we're going to talk a little bit about communication, what that looks like in a relationship, and what do we mean by communicating with each other.
Yeah, well, and the reason why is because we are hard at work putting together our reimagined relationship program that we're calling Couples Mapping. And it's effectively a tool to help create a side-by-side map of your personality and the personality of your partner, and to determine needs and ways to feel grateful for each other by digging into your dichotomies, your cognitive functions, and your firm fixations. That said, before we put together any program, we send a survey out to the people in our community and ask them what are their biggest challenges or what would they like to see in this program. And of the top 5 things, communication came in at number 1. It was so far ahead of numbers 2 through 5. 2 through 5 all vie for second place, basically. And we asked, what are your top 3 challenges? And so many people, number 1, they themselves just simply said communication. It's such a major, major problem in a lot of these relationships. Number 2 was personality type differences, which is unsurprising because it's, our community, so they're all aware of personality challenges and personality type differences. Trust and being vulnerable came at number 3. So it was either a challenge of building trust to begin with, or maybe having had trust undermined, and the willingness to be vulnerable in a relationship where this person can really hurt you. Number 4 was sharing the responsibilities of life. So like domestic responsibilities, who does what? Is one person carrying more than their fair share? How do they motivate their partner to help them? And then the 5th one was a stack of unresolved issues, meaning that there are so many things that have stacked up over the years. You get to a point where it's almost impossible to even have a direct conversation at all, which I guess you could argue, again, falls under that communication challenge.
Well, and if you think about it, communication touches all of these other things. And if you, as a couple, work on the communication skills, and we believe there's a skill to good communication, that does help all these other issues maybe in your relationship, some of the friction points you have. It can address those. And so getting good at communication, thinking about how to communicate and how to build that skill together, we believe that's extremely valuable for you and your partner. When I think about communication, I think in 2 primary areas. The first is what I talked about with those dummy plots in the romantic comedies, which is this idea of not communicating. So there's something going on in your life or something in your partner's life, and you're not sharing with each other, like there's no communication about what's happening there with each other. And then the other part of communication, the second part, is the communication skill itself. So you are speaking up your truth, you are saying things, but your partner's being triggered, or they're misunderstanding, or they're getting their feelings hurt, or your partner's saying things to you and you're getting your feelings hurt, or you're misunderstanding what they're saying. I think we had someone in the community mention recently that when they have any conversation with their partner, within a few minutes, it's escalating into a fight. Like they could just talk about, hey, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? Or, hey, what are the kids going to do tomorrow? Anything, it causes distress and conflict. So obviously there are skills that can be developed inside that communication. And when we talk about skills and communication, most people think about the language we use, the words we speak. And that's true. I mean, the words we speak are important, but when you are in a relationship, communicating with your partner on an emotional level about things that are emotionally important to you and resonant with you, and research backs this up, most of the time, that communication is what's called sub-communication, meaning your body language, your tonality, your facial expressions, the very energy you bring, how much energy you bring into the conversation or argument. And all of these things matter way more than the specific words. And then, how in those arguments with your partner, you've had these, you say something and your intent, the thing you brought to it was all the emotion, all the body language, all the vocal intonation, your facial expression. But the person now takes the words and they start to go down in the words and say, well, you said this specifically. Yeah, but I didn't mean it that way. And you try to now argue about the words themselves, because that's something that some people in the relationship might be more skilled at, the actual language, while the person that maybe brings the energy and the intonation, the understanding of what they're trying to communicate. And now that's just a source for conflict too, just the modality itself of communication. So I think these are some things that obviously affect all partnerships. And if you're listening, you've had some of these experiences in your life.
You can tell when somebody is taking exception to the subcommunication, because if you're in any sort of mediation or whatever, and you've got a third party asking, well, what did he say to you, or vice versa, and then the person, when they mimic what their partner said to them, they twist their face up and they go into this mimicry of the tonality. And then they repeat back almost word for word what the other person said, but they do it in this almost caricaturized demeanor, then he said, oh, well, I guess blah, 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 right? And then, of course, it's very triggering to their partner, because they're like, well, I didn't say it. I didn't say that. When maybe they're saying those words, what the individual articulated word for word, but the energy itself is the thing that's being volleyed. Right? This is what they said, and then they go into this energy intonation, and then the other person says, that's not what I said, and they're talking about the energy and the intonation, and they don't realize that what they're actually communicating about and the thing that they're taking exception to is all of that subcommunication, all of that nonverbal stuff. And I think that it's easy for us to forget the power of that kind of communication to our partner, because that we're receiving that's how you feel about me. It doesn't matter what you said. What I care is what are your feelings towards me? We've mentioned this in a previous podcast and other programs, but really at the end of the day, everybody's asking of their partner, do you love me? That's right. That's it. That's what we're asking. That's the baseline question that all other communication rides on. All other considerations ride upon, do you love me? And if we feel like we're getting regular statements through subcommunication that the person doesn't, because we're experiencing energy of contempt or we're experiencing energy of resentment, and it feels very much like this person, how could you love me through these kinds of emotions? If these emotions are the ones that you're manifesting the most and they're the ones that I'm reading the clearest, how can I find love in there? And it's hard for us to remember that most of those emotions are protections against believing you're not loving me. Like, if I want you to love me and you don't, then I'm going to do everything I can to put myself behind a shield. And those kinds of emotions are usually shields to make it so that we're not vulnerable to each other. So that difficulty of being vulnerable, the difficulty of trusting, the difficulty of having just basic communication around, say, what tasks are we going to be doing, all of that sits on top of this bubbling surface, or bubbling, under the surface of, do you love me? And I'm starting to think that the answer is no.
There are other ways that we communicate with each other too, in addition to the direct, face-to-face communication. Well, obviously we have technology communication through texting, phone, the internet, things like this. But we also have actions that we do in our lives that communicate to our partner. We had Bruce Music, who is a friend of ours and a relationship expert. He was on the show just recently, but he also did a bonus about attachment theory for our couples mapping program. And he talks about a partner might come home from work and go straight upstairs and go to the bedroom for an hour after work without saying hi or checking in with their partner. And that's a form of communication that sends a signal to your partner. Oh no, like the lack of not communication is communicating something. Oh no, they must not love me. They maybe they don't want to be around me, and it starts to set this whole dynamic off.
Maybe they're angry.
Yeah, maybe they're angry or they're frustrated or I did something to offend them, and then he went and posited in the recording we did with him, all these fears the person might have. Oh no, they're having an affair. They're all these experiences they're doing out here. It's distressing to me. So there's other communications besides this. I would say the love languages is another form of communication between partners. Acts of service, gift giving, physical touch, spending quality time with each other, and words of affirmation. Gary Chapman wrote the book 5 Love Languages, and those 5 love languages is the way we communicate to each other. Do you love me? Yes, I love you. Back and forth.
Well, and I think this is where personality type differences come in as well, because we are all assuming that other people are looking at the same things we're looking at and valuing the same things that we are through the lens of our cognitive functions. So if a person communicates in a certain style or says something, we are unconsciously vetting it through what makes sense to us. So we did a podcast on how different personality types say I love you. And we do that primarily through our judging functions or our decision-making functions. And almost like love languages, like there are certain things that we value and we protect those things in our life. And when somebody comes and steps on them or shows a disdain for them or lacks value around those things that we are wired to value, we assume that they're saying that they don't value us as individuals. Not that they are complimenting us in some way, that they are looking at something else that we're not programmed to look at and they have those bases covered. That's the most generous way of looking at it. That's why personality types that are different become attracted to each other, because we recognize that people have, we need them to have our back in decent, in basically all of life. But in moments of tension or moments of conflict, we're not looking at it with the most generous light. We're looking at it in terms of me getting my needs met and making sure that you're answering I love you with yes, I love you, right? Like we're looking at all the things that will soothe our insecurities. And so knowing those pieces are also really important. But when you look at communication as a system running, it's actually difficult to get good communication as the emergent. There are so many different nodes that can go wrong. It's like the Anna Karenina quotes of all happy families are the same and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. Good communication is always good communication. It always looks the same. But there are like a million ways for communication to go wrong, especially in a relationship when the stakes are so high, when this person is your person, like this is your travel buddy throughout your life. And so them, showing up in a way that makes, helps you feel, I shouldn't say makes you feel, because nobody should be making you feel anything, but helps assist you to feel the most empowered, the best, the most taken care of, has your back on getting your needs met, all of that. That person occupies that space with you. You open yourself up to include them as part of who you are. And so when those things go off the rails, man, there's like so many opportunities for hurt and pain and undermining self-worth and self-esteem. And oh no, if this person leaves, then I have to get back out there. And it's just the stakes are so high, maybe the highest of any relationship in our life, really, that there's a lot of different ways it can go wrong.
So let's get a little personal here, because I want you listening to be able to identify some awarenesses in yourself. Now, we've talked a lot before about the 5 love languages. And so if you can create awareness in your own life, like what love language speaks to me? Which are the ones? I almost see them like in a ranking order. Almost if you want to look at like a cognitive function stack for love languages, that's how I look at it. So like what's your top and what's your second, third, fourth, and fifth? For me, gift giving, it's always tough. I'm like, I appreciate when people give me gifts, and I'm just not very good at it myself. So it's always at my bottom. It's always something I'm not really good at. Antonia loves gifts. So I have to really have a extra work at trying to communicate love through gifts, because it's something that really speaks to you, Antonia. So that's one awareness level, is love languages. But just taking that cognitive function or personality type. I think that's because it's a Personality Hacker podcast, this is a great place where we can look at how we're wired individually. So as you start to reflect on your own life, I'll share from my side the one thing that I realize matters to me a lot. I'm an ENFP in the Myers-Briggs system. That means I use a decision-making function we've nicknamed authenticity. Technical name is introverted feeling. And introverted feeling is all focused on core values, intent, and motivations. And so for me, in a partnership with you, Antonia, I'm looking to see if you think I've got good intent. And if you project bad intent, or I think you're projecting bad intent, you may not be, but if I fear that you're questioning my intent, that is probably going to be a petri dish where conflict or hurt or miscommunication could grow out of. And so on my channel of communication, I'm watching for other things too, obviously, my love languages, et cetera, other parts of my personality. But that intent piece, that is so important to me. If I think you believe I have ill intent, I'm having a struggle in that communication.
Yeah. And how many times in an argument have I said, I don't care what your intent is?
Right? And so you're invalidating it too. It's
totally invalidate not even the intent, but even the fact that you think that that's the important thing. There's so many times when I'm just I don't give two craps what your intent is. And I mean, it's easy for me to do that because I'm not using that function. So it's easy for me to diminish its importance or value.
Yeah, and the impact of what happened is more important, or the communication itself, right? That's oftentimes what you're looking at is something that's actually happening in the world, not what I intended to happen in the world. Like, yeah, this bad thing happened, but I wasn't intending that, Antonia. I was intending this to happen. I'm so sorry. But it's like this whole thing that starts to explode.
Well, because I'm using introverted thinking or accuracy. And so for me, it's about the thought that went behind it. Like, what are the thoughts that you're having in that moment? And so to me, intent isn't nearly as important as did you do the work of thinking it through? And so, so it's a difference of values. Of course, for me, because introverted thinking or accuracy is all about like optimization of performance oftentimes and competence and feeling competent, or at least that's how it values itself. Then for me, I get really triggered when I think that you are questioning my competence and questioning whether or not I showed up the best way, or if I feel criticized for my performance. And a lot of times that's not even something you're thinking about. You're like, I'm not really thinking about how competent you are in this moment. I'm like, of course you are. And you're criticizing me. But it's these raw nerves, right? Like these elements that we're just assuming the other person is judging us based on the criteria that we're judging ourselves on and others. And so when we have that cross communication, which I'm looking at, in the blind man and the elephant, I'm looking at the trunk and you're looking at the tail, and we're arguing our point of view from those places, it's so easy to feel like the other person is poking at a bruise. And especially if I don't feel competent. If I don't feel competent and I think that you're criticizing my competence, then it is a bruise. It's a bruise that I created in myself. And you're, whether or not you intended to or not, it feels like you're brushing up against it. And then, of course, you're the bad guy. You're the bad guy because you brushed up against a bruise I gave to myself.
So as you reflect on this in your own life, you may not be an ENFP like me or an ENTP like Antonia, but if you are, you probably resonate with what we're saying. You're most likely a different personality type. And it would be good to know, how do you show up as your type? What are the things that you're reading from the other person in your partnership? And it is so obvious to you that, oh, this person sees it this way, of course, and they're trying to tell me this message about myself or about the interaction. They may not have that on their awareness at all. They may not, unless they've been trained or have built the skill of learning you as a person, as a system, a human system, they may not know that they're projecting something or making you feel bad or having you, feel a little less than. And that, again, can cause conflict in the relationship.
Well, and I think sometimes it's just a matter of slowing down. Like when I mentioned that of the things that were surveyed, the stack of unresolved issues, that's how I communicated it. But when I was reading through the survey responses, it was things like, even when we start talking about our days, it always leads to a fight. Or I can't ask, that person to do anything without them blowing up at me. And that's oftentimes how it was stated. And it's like, well, why would somebody blow up at you for something as mundane as asking if you mowed the lawn or whatever.
Could you carry the laundry basket upstairs for me, please?
Right, exactly. And we actually have, we know a couple where she leads with extroverted thinking or effectiveness, and he leads with introverted feeling or authenticity. And whenever she would ask him to do any sort of chore, it would end up becoming this blow up. And one of the reasons why is because he didn't want to be controlled by her. And so he would use that as an opportunity to almost like stage a coup, right? Or not stage a coup. That's the wrong way of saying it, because I'm sure he has gotten the entire family on his side against her at times. But it was actually more like an opportunity to show what do activists do? A silent protest,
well,
right?
Yeah, he created a Cold War often, not even a blow up. It was usually like a Cold War for many days around something.
Yeah, and a big piece of this was because they had things they needed to talk about directly. But the whether or not the laundry basket got taken upstairs, because she would like put it in front of the steps so that he would have to take it up the steps in order to go there, but he would just walk over them, right? He would like walk 2 steps up so that he could, he wouldn't have to bring the laundry basket upstairs. And I mean, just silly little things, right? These are adults, by the way. and it sounds really judgy when I say that, but I know for a fact I've done the same kind of thing. I've just done it in my way, right? I get real judgy of other people. I'm like, oh, that's an effectiveness, authenticity argument. But our authenticity, accuracy arguments are just as stupid, right? They're just as young. But the thing is that what lives underneath these arguments isn't stupid. They're legitimate issues that need to be addressed. They're things that may have stacked over many years that have become habituated to a place where you're just living with them because you're not sure what the on-ramp is. Like, what's the inroad to having this conversation? And if you have a million little hurts, like it just, sometimes it feels so big that where do I even begin? Where do I even start talking about the things that I believe you've done to me or the problems that I think that we have? And it's almost like you're kind of waiting for the breaking point to happen to you so that you can, I don't know, graduate to the next relationship or make it complete or whatever it is. But oftentimes it's just like this holding pattern.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show. And this is where I go back to awareness around typology, around how your partner is wired, how you're wired can be so powerful. So again, as a personal example, I don't know how Antonia's going to feel about this, but
I guess we'll find out.
we didn't get in a fight right before we started recording this, but we almost did. We almost got in a fight right before we started recording that. Not a fight, like another thing. And I'm like, not yelling or anything. When I say fight, I mean a conflict. What happened was right before we started recording, I wanted to talk about the difference between verbal communication and subcommunication. And I was going to give an actual number out. Like, I think it's like 90% or 7% breakdown, whatever. Like, I was going to try to get the actual numbers. So I said, hey, would you be willing to look up on your phone this statistic? So you, Antonia, started to look it up. And then you started throwing me all these numbers. You're like, and then this article says this thing, and you're giving me a lot of fidelity to the data. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's way more than I can hold in my head unless I start writing it down. And now I've got to hit these numbers precisely. If we're getting precise numbers, I want to be precise around it. And what was happening from a typology standpoint, so just to give an illustration to you listening, what was happening is my 10-year-old of effectiveness, extroverted thinking now has this information. First of all, I believe it has to be acted upon. That's just how effectiveness typically sees information. Second of all, now I'm going to be in the mode of thinking. I have to write it down and try to hit these numbers correctly that you're giving me when I just want to kind of anecdotally talk about it. But I want to make sure I was in the range, the correct range of of the percentage points.
Right. Like if you say, 7% of communication is verbal and the rest is nonverbal, are those numbers right? Is somebody going to come after me? And I go look it up and I'm like, well, 7% is verbal, but then, 38% is voice tonality and 55% is body language, but only if you're talking about things that are emotional.
Yeah, all this stuff.
And you're like hang tight.
Whoa.
I didn't ask for all of that. And I'm like, no, you're going to want this information.
Yeah, but see, I want to be, while we're in a podcast, I want to be in my introverted feeling authenticity process. I want to be very present and in the space of like my good front seat in my car model, right, in personality terms. So I'm like, I don't need all that. That's weight. And so you're like, what? And then you're like, well, fine. I guess I looked this up for no reason. And you're like upset with me. And I'm like, well, fine. I can use your restroom and I'll be right back. So I leave the room. And as I went to the restroom, and as I'm coming back, I'm thinking through the hallway as I'm walking back into the studio. And I'm going, oh my gosh, literally personality type came to my mind. And I went, Antonia looking this up on her phone to find the data is her accuracy, introverted thinking, wanting to get the data right. And she's offering me a gift of getting precise data. And here I just basically invalidated that. I just said, oh, I don't need all this. It's way too much, making her feel. No wonder she was frustrated. No wonder we almost got in this massive conflict. And so I came back and I said, hey, I'm sorry. I realized you were giving me a gift there. I figured you're telling me you got to hit all these numbers and do something with this, but you're actually trying to help in this moment, and I asked you to do it. So, hey, I'm sorry I did that. Let's hit record. Let's go ahead and do the show.
But you're not saying the nicest thing that you said to me.
What's that?
You said, I'm sorry for doing that because your TI, of course, we're using the shorthand, introverted thinking or accuracy. But you said your TI I've really benefited from it in so many other times.
Yeah.
Just because this one moment was a moment when it was getting me out of my introverted feeling, it doesn't mean that it's not a gift you give to me on a regular basis. I mean, you basically said that word for word. And so, I mean,
I forgot I said that, but
how that is a way to thaw an icy heart.
Oh, there you go.
Is to say the thing that's driving me crazy right now, I have massive gratitude for because of all the other times that it has come through for me.
Yeah. And so maybe it sounds like we're propping ourselves up. Look how amazing we are at navigating conflict. Trust me, there's times when this doesn't go so well. The point is that I think there's moments, Antonia, you said earlier, slowing down, like slowing the process down. And for you and your partner to have an awareness of how you're wired, or even if just you are listening right now and your partner has no interest in personality type, they could care less. In fact, they think your little side hobby of listening to this podcast and some of the things you're into is geeky and stupid or whatever. They're dismissive of it. It doesn't matter. Just you on the one side of the partnership, knowing how your partner's wired, slowing down and just checking in. Oh, they're probably bringing this function, this cognitive function of how they see the world and how they make their decisions. No wonder they're seeing it this way. This is actually a gift they're bringing me, and I'm totally misreading it, and I'm putting it on my terms, on my turf, and that's really unfair to do. And I bet that could go a long way for communication issues between you and your partner.
Yeah, even if they're sending you debunking articles around Myers-Briggs, you can still use it to better your relationship.
Exactly.
And I think the thing you mentioned, actually, this situation, and like you say, there are plenty of moments when this has not worked out for us. So we're highlighting this is a Facebook moment, okay? We're highlighting a good moment.
Instagram photo right
That's
here,
right. This
verbally.
is a relationship Instagram photo moment for us. So it's not like it always ends up like this. But that said, I think it does illustrate two other points about communication that aren't directly type related necessarily. The first one is sometimes it's best to get out of the physical space in which the argument is starting or happening. And it's because, at least for me, I don't know how you feel, Joel, but I have seen this for other people who are similar to me, that there's an energy that gets locked into that space of tension. And if I can just leave that space for a moment, it's almost like I can shake the emotion off. Maybe I need like 5 minutes or less. Sometimes I need as much as 10 minutes. Just, I think that's why they say just like leave and go for a walk. Really, I think what it is it's leaving the ghosts of those emotions that get anchored to that physical proximity. And then when you leave, almost within 5 or 10 minutes, unless your ego is trying to prove a point or say you were right anyway, usually if you're in a space of humbleness, you can go, why was I so mad there? I don't understand. Like, why did it get so salty? So that slowing down part can also be accompanied with a little bit of space, like slowing down, trying to get your bearings first, get some space from the energetic field you've created of tension. And I think you don't have to be super into like energy talk to understand what we're saying. Like, I think that there's an energy that comes in an argument or a fight in a relationship that can get caught in a room. You can feel it. It's like palpable around you. It's almost like you're in a hamster ball of anger. And if you can leave that hamster ball, oftentimes you can shake it off and go, okay, I can return to the conversation a little better. But I think the other thing too, and this is something that Bruce recommends, we'll just give a little taste of the module he created. It's a bonus module, like Joel said, on attachment theory. And one of the things he said is a rule that he recommends to his clients is the principle of connect first, communicate second. Because again, most of that communication is going to be subterranean. I'll actually give you the stats that I looked up. The ones that Joel didn't want me to throw at him, but I've got them written down now. And I think I alluded to them before in a funny way, but it is 7% is verbal. And by the way, this is from a study in 1971. You probably have heard these stats before, and it is specifically for context around feelings and attitudes, like what you don't like. This is specifically in communication or conversations around things that have an emotional bent to them. And relationships are pretty much that all the time, particularly when you're talking about communication struggles. 7% is verbal, 38% is tonality of voice, and 55% is body language. So the principle of connect first, communicate second is an attempt to get that vocal tonality and the body language into a softened place. Because if you're connected, it's hard to come at somebody that you're feeling connected to. It's hard to really have an aggressive stance when you're already in a place of simpatico. And then when you add the verbal component on top of it, now the other person is far more likely to receive what you're saying in a positive way. And I think if a person has gotten to a place in the relationship where almost every conversation is triggering, I think that they shouldn't be having conversations for a while. I think they should just be connecting. Just connect until you get to a place where you can have conversations at all. That means that, like, don't come home and talk about what each other's day was like. Come home and hold each other, or come home and look in each other's eyes, eye gaze for a while. Like, don't go straight to content. Don't go straight to data. Go to an emotional rapport. Build that emotional rapport to a place where you can feel each other's goodwill. Like you're a team. That was the point of it to begin with. Why bring data in if data is just going to cause more of a rift? And once there's a softening through connection, then start adding the verbal component, because it can build on top of it, and then you can start addressing issues. But then if you get to a place where you're back to being at each other's throat, then the rule is to go back to connection and keep going back to connection until communication is a lot more streamlined.
That really reminds me of something we work with our profiler training students on day one at our profiler training event, which is when we talk about building rapport in a profiling session, right? When you're sitting down with somebody and doing a formal profiling session, we talk about building rapport, and we identify two types of rapport that sometimes can be in conflict with each other. We talk about energetic rapport, which is what most people think of when they think of rapport. The vibing with someone, the body language, the vibing. If you go into like neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, they talk about mirroring and pacing and leading, how you actually physically position your body and stuff like this. And then we talk about a non-obvious version of rapport, which is data rapport. So the rapport of the thoughts and the actual data you're transmitting between each other. And as a professional profiler, if you're developing the profiling skill, you want to develop both of these, be able to be an energetic rapport with someone and data rapport with someone. But sometimes, one shuts off the other. And so if you're trying to be in data rapport with someone else and transfer information, but you haven't really established that energetic rapport, that it almost makes it even harder to establish that sometimes, and vice versa. If you're in that energetic vibe and rapport, sometimes it's hard to have the communication of what your thoughts, what thoughts you're having, the thought transference. And so there's a balance here in some of that. And we do a lot of workshopping around it, obviously, for profiling. But in a relationship, I think that's something that can also serve you and your partner, is understanding in which way are we in rapport with each other right now.
Right. And data rapport sits on top of energetic rapport. The energy has to be established first, because that's the place where it's like, oh, I like the cut of this person's jib, right? Like I like this person. So now data rapport becomes much easier because you know that transfer of information is something that you can trust, right? And it's kind of like that old phrase, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It's the same thing. It's like the caring, the energy is the bedrock of everything. And then now you can get into data rapport by hearing what the person has to say. And then, like you were talking about, NLP talks about energetic rapport has been like mirroring and pacing and that sort of thing. But data rapport is ensuring that communication is happening clearly. So you can say things like, what I hear you saying is, or, did I get this right? Or I'm going to say something. Does that resonate with you? And really actually care about the transfer of information from person to person. And so I think that we are so insistent. We're such a verbal culture. And I think we're getting more and more verbal all the time due to things like social media, when we're texting things to each other all the time. And we talk about 240 characters or whatever it is. Like everything is in words and slices of words. And we miss out on a lot of opportunities that people maybe in past centuries had of really establishing rapport through energy. We're losing some of that. And so when we go into a relationship and we end up in a partnership, it's easy for us to forget how big a piece that is, the energetic rapport, and maybe how few opportunities we've had to build the skill before we entered the relationship. And so relationships become a perfect opportunity to build the skill of energetic rapport, making sure you're staying in that space with another person, the one person that you want to be in that space with the most, right? And so things like connecting, just energetically connecting, holding each other's hands, holding each other's bodies, looking each other's eyes and eye gazing. These are all ways to set a really good bedrock before you even get to verbal communication. And then, of course, when you hit verbal communication, you're going to want that really, actually, I would even say like a soft bedrock, like a soft place to land when all of those things that can go wrong in verbal communication, all those opportunities for misunderstandings, you want a softer place to land when those happen because they're inevitable, right? Miscommunication is inevitable. Are you going to fall in something hard and, hurt each other and yourself in those moments? Or are you going to have a softer place to land, which is the rapport?
You probably miss the time period with your partner when it was more about the energy vibe. You may have been with your partner for a while, and you remember a time when you're dating and being attracted to each other. There's this sexual spark, this crackling energy in the air of the sexual pull toward each other, right? It's attraction, it's sexual, it's dynamic. It's usually subcommunicated. It's energetic. Your hormones are raging. We're probably smelling each other's bodies and essences, and there's this connection that happens at that level. And then we get into partnership and life goes on, and you can't always be on your quote unquote honeymoon forever. And so you have to talk about, work and kids and living arrangements and chores. You're operating your life in a day to day. And so the mundane, the transfer of information isn't that electric sizzle or spark anymore. But that's really where you found that connection first between you and your partner, most likely. Now, a thinker is going to be listening right now and saying, no, it was all about the words. It was all about the banter, all about the conversation.
Listen, we're not animals, all right? Thinkers understand a sexual spark. They know what that means to be in vibe with somebody that you're in a relationship with early.
I understand. And some thinkers will report that's not happening, but I would still argue it is happening.
It's totally happening. Why would you fall in love with somebody if you didn't have that that delicious crackling of energy? Correct.
And so that's the thing you're trying to find is that connection point again. Now, necessarily, depending on where you're at in your relationship, some relationships have a lot of baggage and it takes a while to get here. And we're not suggesting that it's going to be easy in these ways. But I wanted to point you, as you're listening, to a time period when you and your partner did have more of this in your relationship. So it's not hopeless. You know that it's possible. This deep connection, this communication foundation that Antonia's talking about, very possible because that's the foundation most likely your entire relationship started with.
Maybe I should have said we're not robots. Because the animals understand that vibe thing. Yeah, thinkers aren't robots. I would add a little
bit. Thinkers are animals.
We are animals. I would also add to what you just said, it's not necessarily that as you graduate into different phases of your relationship, and we talked about this with Bruce a couple podcasts ago, or maybe it was last podcast. I don't remember, but it was the one where he talked about the 3 stages of relationship. When you get past the honeymoon phase or that early, high on chemicals phase, it's not that the energetic vibe you're looking for is to go back into that highly electric place, although it is really nice when you have moments of it, right? And you want to get as many moments of that as possible, I would say. If you're in a pair bond relationship, you want to keep that spark alive. That said, it's not going to be like it was. So what I think you're talking about, Joel, just to make sure I understand your point, and to make sure there's like a little bit of a specificity around that, is that you're pointing back to that honeymoon phase as a time when vibing was the biggest part of the relationship.
Right.
And I would think that no matter who you are, no matter what relationship you are in, those early days are very much about those vibes. So remember that vibing was already a big part of your relationship at one point. So vibing can also be a big part of your relationship now, or at least you can remember what it was like to vibe. That said, as you go into your relationship, the vibe is going to look different. It's going to look a lot more comfortable. It's going to be a lot more of a, it's like the coat that you loved so much you wore all the time, and now it's just you just grab it like it's your favorite coat. There's that thing that you feel that's so comfortable inside of it, and it's warm on cold days, and somehow it's not too hot on warmer days, and it's like it's your perfect go-to thing. And you want that kind of relationship with your partner. You want them to be the thing you turn to first. It's like that's always going to be a place of comfort. It's always going to be a place where even if you're not saying anything, you're sort of saturating in this really nice, comfortable vibe. And that's actually where you're headed with peak moments, with spikes of moments when it goes back into electric. And so if you can remember a time when vibe was really important to you, you can understand why it would remain important even if the vibe is less, what's the word? Less...
Like the amplitude of it.
Yes. Like the amplitude isn't there, but the consistency is there. And I think that's really, I think that's something that I think we all want and move toward, but we don't know how to get it. And we think specific words are going to get us there. And they may or may not. Sometimes words help us understand each other, and sometimes they create bigger misunderstandings.
There's a movie we watched recently. It was a Judd Apatow movie, This Is 40, that I really enjoyed.
That was a very cute movie.
Because, they're going through kind of the humdrum of being a couple every day. They're a married couple. They've got kids. They've been together for years. And you can kind of see their struggles as they're both turning 40. And I don't think that's a spoiler to say that. They're both turning 40 in the movie. Within a week of each other, I think is the premise. And it's interesting to see that they go on a weekend together and they have that amplitude and they have fun and they eat junk food and they stay up all night. And I think they get high and they just, they have a fun experience, and that's that amplitude, and it kind of puts a spark back into the relationship. And you can tell that they genuinely cared and loved each other though too, because it wasn't that thing that caused the spark. The spark was there under the surface. It was the context that allowed it to come out. And it's actually a really nice movie. I thought it was, if it's rated R or something, so if you don't like adult content, it's definitely going to have some of that. But it's a funny movie. It's an interesting movie. And I thought it made me feel good about relationships because I think it honors them. It blesses relationships and honors them. And I thought it was a fun movie to watch.
Yeah. So if you are in a place in your relationship where you're finding yourself really having communication struggles, then I think one of the things I would recommend is, if I was going to encapsulate the primary principle of this entire thing, is that there's a lot of ways that communication can go wrong, but there's a couple of different things that you can do to stack the deck in your favor. And that is, remember how important connection is. Remember that most of your communication is, particularly in relationships and when you're communicating emotional things and preferences, it's primarily nonverbal. And that can't be overstated. It's an incredibly important part of communication in relationships, is to remember that people are picking up your energy. And if you want to test this, after you say something that's triggering to your partner, ask them to repeat it back to you. And if it's laden with a bunch of energy of contempt, that's not necessarily the energy they're putting into it. It's the energy they're reading from you. When their face gets twisted, when they say things in a caricaturized, mocking way, that's not because that's how they feel about you. It's how they think you feel about them. And so remember that this is a big piece of it. And then connecting through physical touch, through eye contact, through really putting out an energy of good and positive will towards the other person, remembering that we all evaluate things a little differently and getting familiar with each other, getting familiar with our personality types, really understanding how some of those lenses can feel marginalized and how we can amplify them, communicating our gratitude that we know that these personality type differences have poured into our lives in a lot of different ways, maybe not at that very moment, but in the gestalt of our lives. We have very much benefited from this person having our back in something that we are not wired to look at. So really, really like focusing on gratitude as opposed to a sense of entitlement of what you should have in that moment. And really slowing down in these moments. Slowing down and maybe getting some physical distance from the place of the fight. Now, I didn't say this in this podcast. I think we've mentioned it before in other times. But one of the things that's really important, and this is verbal, is to set expectations that when you're walking away, you're not leaving the person because you're abandoning them. You're leaving so that you can have a more successful conversation with them in a moment. So if you are in the intensity of that hamster ball of rage or anger or frustration or whatever it is, then to say, I need a moment. I need a moment to physically remove myself from this place, and I will be right back. I swear I'm not hanging up the phone. Metaphorically, I swear I'm not abandoning you in this conversation. I just need a little bit of physical space. And then maybe even in times when you're not fighting, communicate, I might need that when we're fighting. So when we're fighting and I say, I need some space, I'll be right back. Please don't weaponize that or project ill intent on me. I've noticed that if I can get a finger on how I fight, and then in moments when we're not fighting, communicate to you, Joel, what I think my tactics are, what I think I'm doing in those moments, and what my needs are in a quiet, like in a moment when we're not triggered. When those moments happen, I can do a callback to the conversation we had when we were in a better space. And I can say, hey, remember, I don't think I have the wherewithal to say, hey, remember when I said that thing? I just lean on your memory to remember that I said that. And sometimes we'll even do things like have phrases. You could almost call them argument safe words, where we'll have a specific phrase that we say to each other to call back to a thing that we need, that in the moment of heat and argument, we don't have the wherewithal or the presence of mind to communicate. And that takes a little bit of planning. That takes some forethought. It means deconstructing things in a moment when you're not thinking about them. But that would fall under the important, not urgent category, which is like, it's not urgent because it's not the moment of the fight, but it's still really important.
Like, as an example, when my last relationship, she would leave the argument. That was the end of the argument. And sometimes it was either over the phone or she would leave the room. And so I came up with this phrase that I would say to you, like, please don't hang up the phone. Please don't slam the door. And so you will say to me now, look, I'm not slamming the door, and then you'll walk out. I just need some space, and you'll walk out. Or I'm not hanging up the phone. So these little phrases can help. Oh, okay, she's not hanging up the phone. Great. Metaphor, she's leaving the room, getting some space, going to come back, and we're going to unpack this together.
And I think finally, as we wrap up here, one more thing, and I didn't mention it before, so this is not part of the wrap up. This is like a thought that just my extroverted intuition or my exploration just came up with or made the connection. There was an article I read, and I do not remember the statistic. I just remember that couples that have, I think it was at least 7 times, it might have even been higher, but at least 7 times the amount of positive things they say to each other versus the one negative thing they say, that was a formula for relationship success. So if you're going to look at communication, one of the things you can do, again, to stack the deck in your favor is to honestly and sincerely say as many positive and generous things to your partner as you can, particularly if you're out of the habit of doing it. And this is not as easy for people who tend to be less verbose. So one of the things that Joel has done is he leaves me, and I know, again, this is probably sounds like it probably sounds braggy from me because I'm bragging on Joel here.
What are you going to say? I don't even know what you're going to say.
Well, you have a tendency, and you've been doing this for years and years, to leave little notes, really simple little love notes all over the house for me, particularly when you're about to leave on a trip or I'm about to leave on a trip. So I'll like open up my makeup bag, and there'll be like a little note that says, like, I love you with a heart, Joel, or you're the love of my life. Or I'll like open up, a drawer, my sock drawer, and inside will be something that says, you have beautiful eyes or whatever. So if you're not a person who is really good at verbally stating this, now Joel is also good at verbally stating these things, but if you're a person who's not, then you might want to pick up a habit like that. And so it's constant and perpetual communication of positive things, so that when you have those moments of intensity or like, really kind of feeling like all you want to do is say every negative thing you can think about your spouse, you've already built up in the bank. You might even be in the black. So when you say all of those other things, you're not now in the red, in the end, in the goodwill in the relationship.
So is this like official record on air that my gift giving is like covered by my words of affirmation now? My lack of, because the gift giving is not always a hit.
Because you're a words of affirmation person and I'm a gift giver. Yeah. You know what? I actually do think that there's some transfer there. There's some transferable value. So
you heard it here. Yeah. And Tony said it live. It's captured now forever. So it counts.
Okay, let's wrap it up.
So you've been listening along. What do you think? What's been coming up for you as you're reflecting on your own partnership? Maybe a current partnership, maybe a past partnership if you're single right now. What are some ways that you can look at your personality type and the person that you're in partnership with and see some of these things that we're talking about today? Some of the principles of slowing down, awareness, rapport, all those can apply no matter how you're wired. But we really do believe that personality type comes in here a lot. And we want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your story. Share your story of maybe something that went really well in your partnership. Maybe you do know your partner's type and you are applying this, and something that was going to be a disaster or a big fight, you navigated your way around that as a couple because of some of this awareness. Or maybe you have some challenges and you can share your stories around some of the things that didn't go so well, some of the challenges you had to overcome as a couple, or maybe you're still working through and you have some understanding and awareness of those. We want to hear from you.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it in all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And we've been putting the finishing touches on our couples mapping program, which is designed to be a side-by-side comparison of you and your partner's personality types, including your dichotomies, your cognitive functions, your firm fixation. We've got a bonus module in there about attachment style. And the entire program is intended to help you go from maybe feeling a little salty about your partner to feeling true gratitude. Talking about overcoming communication challenges, your willingness to have trust and be vulnerable in the relationship, who gets to decide who's doing what in the relationship, and sharing the responsibilities of life, and also dealing with some of those unresolved issues. So if that sounds interesting to you, head over to personalityhacker.com under our catalog of programs and check out Couples Mapping.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning. We are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.